Good evening, everyone. We'll just allow for attendees to filter in, and we'll be starting momentarily. Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's inaugural Retail Design Institute Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Council event. I am Andrew Lee of the New York chapter, and together with my fellow council members, Lena Lim, Tara Leong, and Carla Wells, we are humbled and honored to be hosting tonight's event, Tackling Diversity from a Professional Organization Perspective. 2020 was a seminal year raising awareness, opening up dialogue and exchanging of ideas around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, major demonstrations throughout the country and around the world were sparked at the end of May last year. The Institute established the Retail Design Institute Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council in June last year, and the council formed goals organized around 3 pillars of listening, sharing, and creating. With the new year, this effort remains as important as ever. We are still in a global health pandemic. We are into day 3 of Derek Chauvin's trial on George Floyd's death, and there's rising violence against Asian Americans. Amidst all of this, we are here today to launch a series of discussions tackling diversity. We intend to provide a platform that allows our members and members of our industry to learn from thought leaders and discover paths to enact change. Through this series, we'll delve deeper into diversity at a retailer level, both in the field and at corporate offices, explore diversity and mentorship in the design profession, and investigate the importance of education from K through 12 and college and graduate programs and the role it ultimately plays in creating a more diverse profession. To kick off, we have this series. Tonight, we look at the professional organizations and how they are tackling diversity through membership, accreditation, and advocacy. Tonight, we have invited leaders from the American Institute of Architects, the National Organization of Minority Architects, the IIDA, and the Women Presidents Educational Organization. I would like to introduce our moderator this evening, Keisha Blake Harp, Executive Director, Women's Presidents Educational Organization. As Executive Director of WPEO New York, Keisha oversees all outreach efforts and develops the organization's program and events. Her responsibilities include management of the WBENC certification program and certification committee membership, as well as recruitment and retention of women business enterprises. Tonight, Keisha is joined by Elsie St. Ledger, President-elect IIDA New York, and Interior Designer and Assistant Project Manager at NYU Langone Health. Gregory Schweitzer, President, the New York chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects, and founder and managing principal of Gregory Schweitzer Architecture. Kavitha Matthew, Special Projects Director, AIA New York, and founder of Equity Collab. We want to thank all our guests tonight for their ongoing work with their organizations and joining us this evening to share their perspective. And with that, I'll hand over to Keisha. Thank you, Keisha.
Thank you for that introduction, Andrew. I'd like to invite our panelists to come on camera and join us. Looking forward to this evening's conversation. We have some great questions to start the conversation. Really want to be able to dive a little bit deeper into the question of diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly in this sector. My approach to this, just to give a little plug for our organization, we certify women owned, operated, and controlled businesses by a specific standard that's given to us by the national organization, Women's Business Enterprise National Council. It's important for us to participate in conversations like this because our primary mission is to advocate for diversity and inclusion and within the supply chain of the major corporations and the major purchasers within our economy. It's important for us also to understand that we are part of a larger ecosystem. So wherever we can have a presence and a voice to advocate for diversity, we want to be a part of that conversation. We understand the connection between the procurement, diverse voices in our community, and how that drives economic growth. So with that, we have some questions prepared that I will share. I think what I will do is ask the questions to the people that I see on my screen to my left and to my right. So I have Elsie. I'm going to start with you because you're the first person I can see here. So my first question to you, and everyone, all the panelists, please feel free to jump in and create a more organic, casual conversation. But Elsie, I'll start with you. This question that we have is directed not only to you, but mostly to your organization, all of the organizations represented in this conversation. Says, as membership and accreditation-based professional organizations here, what barriers of entries are being adjusted to create a more diverse organization? It's a very large and all-encompassing question, but going beyond just adjusting the criteria, we're not really focusing so much on adjusting the criteria, but how are you making your presence known and making sure that you're representing your organization and bringing more diverse voices in?
So that's a very complicated question. Thanks for making me first. Just my luck, right?
Of course.
Well, there are, of course, the superficial, managing the cost of membership, making sure we reach out to the different schools. I mean, we happen to be New York based, and we're lucky that we have so many design programs locally. But we are, and IIDA New York is statewide, not just citywide. And so we've made a point of reaching out to schools outside of the metro area. So we do have city centers in Rochester, Albany, Buffalo, and Syracuse. And so we have reached out to the local design schools and design programs and have a pretty active knowledge forum is what we call it, pretty active outreach to students. So that's always been an initiative of IIDA New York, and it's one that we've expanded. But even having said that, reaching out to students of color is much more difficult because design is not necessarily open as a profession to young kids of color, particularly Black children. And so that's something we're tackling now and trying to figure out how to reach out beyond the known boundaries of this profession. We have, within IIDA, we just created something called Committee of Action, and we have a VP of Action. And she is very, very passionate about reaching out to students and involving them, but reaching out in particular to Black students, letting them know that there is a career path within design. And it doesn't necessarily have to be as an interior designer or even as an architect, although we primarily focus on interior design. It could be all the ancillary industries that support us as designers and as builders. And so that's one very particular initiative we have. And that's that VP of Action that is very, very new to us. And that just started last year in 2020, although it was something that we've been thinking about. But the events of the last year really sort of sped up creating that, sped up the timeline. And then in reaction to all the events last year, the 4 founding members started something we're calling Equity Council. And that is to really take on, in a broader sense, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we are focusing right now on bringing in, making design firms accountable, not just performative. We are dedicated to, equity and blah, blah, blah. What we want, what we're starting with is what everyone understands, hard numbers, right? A certain percentage we would like to be, Black. And what does that look like? And how do you do that? And then how do you engage leadership and all staff in equity? Is it a matter of training? Is it a matter of workshops? We are working all of that out right now, and we are launching that officially this June 2021. And so it's a passion project, but it's a long-term project, and it's one that IIDA New York, when we went to existing leadership, leadership at that time, they were like, yes, absolutely, go for it, absolutely, yes, because we've all been thinking about how to react to this and thinking about our role in what is and isn't within the industry. And so, that's where that's a long-winded answer, but to a very complicated question.
Well, yes, of course, because then, it really, I think, naturally falls into questions about even promoting the profession itself, right? So then speaking to students of colors to say, well, what exactly what courses do I have to take? I think I'm pretty good at art. I'm really good at color.
Right. And we have different within the organizations. We do have different committees addressing all of that. The other thing that VP of Action, the Action Committee looks into is community outreach, right. And so that's beyond diversity and inclusion, but it's also in a way, opening access to people that would not normally think about reaching out to the design community for help addressing whatever issues, right? Whether it's the right chair for for an intake room or whatever it is, we are making it known in a louder voice that we are available to consult in that way. So there are so many different ways to reach out to the community. There's no way it can be just a singular event. It has to be a multi-pronged approach. That's what we figured. And so that's what we're doing. We're looking inside our organization to see how we can use the tools that we already have available and set up, and then expand from there.
And building on those comments, Greg, since you're on my other panel, I feel like doing a huge throwback to, I don't know, a game show or Brady Bunch or something. But you're up next. Game show. So building on those comments, is there something that your organization has done to make some sort of shift? So we all understand that more diverse voices, there are tons of working papers, there's lots of conversation that, okay, there are more women, more LGBTQIA people in the room. What is the diverse voice that's going to come in to change And, you know, in my space that I work, everything is about, you know, bottom line money. You know, a lot of the major industries want diverse voices in the room because it drives innovation, obviously, and then it drives growth, and, you know, it drives more profits. So is there a specific path or initiative that your organization is taking to say, okay, we need more diverse voices in the room? Are you focusing on one particular plan of action? Elsie spoke about reaching out to different schools and targeting different students and outside of the New York metro area. What is your organization's
Well, how much time do I have to answer
of
this?
action?
Because we have,
a VP of action.
I could tell you now that our organization is right at ground zero on this, for lack of a better expression. But first, just to let people understand, you know, we are a professional organization. We're not an accrediting organization. I think part of your question was about accreditation. You know, we have programs in place where we're doing outreach early. We're focusing on the little guys that are in middle school and considering architecture and design through high school. So we have programs, for example, like Project Pipeline, which is a national initiative of our organization, where we're going into schools and we're introducing the youth of color about what it takes to be an architect, and trying to start to help them develop the vocabulary of architecture and design, walking them through little projects and vignettes, and letting them know that they can be architects. And then throughout that process, you know, it nurtures into, you know, the students that are in high school and then into college, where we have sub-chapters of our organization which deal with college students. And during that process, they're collecting and understanding each other as they move through, you know, all the nuances of the education process of becoming architects. But we're here as an organization of professionals, tend to support them as well and include them in our programming, and really try and engage with them to let them know that we're here to support them, and we also want them to be professional architects and designers. And then once they graduate from college, we bring them into our organization, and we try and introduce them to, you know, the various professionals in the organization, try and help them get internships. We help them prepare for the examination so they can plan and take the examination so they can go through the licensure process. And then we hope that, you know, during this process of building a strong relationship with them and through mentorship, and that they're able to, you know, have a good start in this profession and take off. Little, you know, that people know, and it's interesting. And I'm just going to use Black architects as an example, even though our organization is all encompassing. But I think this is just one of these quick figures that I could toss out there. There are over 116,000 registered architects in the United States. Of that number, only 2,378 are Black Americans. The numbers are staggering. So it's our goal to really try and foster and promote, and, you know, this is the essence of why we're taking the direction that we're taking in nurturing from early on, right, through elementary school, through high school, through college, and in the earlier years in the profession, to keep them on board. Because oftentimes, you know, you have people that go through all of that process and they get their first job and they become so disenfranchised to where they say, I don't think I want to pursue this any further. Right. And, you know, and oftentimes, you know, they just disappear from the profession. And, you know, we're trying to, you know, plug the hole and give them the support that they need and let them know that, you know, yeah, it's tough out there. And yes, you may be the only person in the room sitting at the table, hearing the conversation. And because you are in a position of where you're not necessarily in power, to where you just kind of recede in the room and not be as dominant as you possibly could. But we're teaching our folks not to do that. You know, use your voice. If you're the only person in the room, you're the only person sitting at that table, use your voice. take that opportunity to let people understand that you're also the professional in the room. So in essence, that's where, you know, NICOBA has really vectored off in NOMA in making sure that, you know, our members are well supported and have the tools they need so they can succeed in the profession. So that's where we are.
That's quite a lot of work. That's amazing amount of outreach and connection and fantastic touch points along every single level. I will say I have a 2.5-year-old, and he got a architecture for babies from a baby series. So we've had a lot of conversation, and I was like, I can't believe there's architecture for babies. So
Yeah.
even you guys are starting young with your outreach, so kudos.
Yeah, you have to, because that's the only way that we can really feed into the system. I mean, right now, with the numbers as low as they are, you know, that's kind of off-putting to some people.
Oh, absolutely.
And you know, and you know, it's initially, you know, with the licensure professionals, people of color, originally had more men than anything that did that. And now you're seeing to where the profession is really starting to open up a little bit, to where you're starting to find more women of color becoming these dynamos in the force in this whole effort, and, you know, walking into this space and really, you know, showing up. And it's a great thing. And I want to see more. And anything that our organization can do to help that, that's what we're all about.
And exactly to my point about being part of the ecosystem, you know, for our organization advocating for women business owners, we see a lot of women in construction, a lot of women who are engineers, and really making sure that they see the connection between even a conversation I had recently with in the entertainment with Viacom, CBS, Warner Media, and all these organizations said, well, we're looking for people in design, but we can't find them. There are no women. There are no women of color. We can't find any women in construction. And I know that I'm in a position of a lot of privilege. And I was like, I know tons of women who are architects and who are in design, and that can help you build a set. But, you know, it might not be, to your point, it might not be a situation where, you know, you're going to the right places and having the conversations early enough to say, well, if you're working in design, there's so many options for you, right?
Right.
So I'm going to bring Kavita into this conversation and for you to share a little bit more about your organization, your strategy. Elsie, I'm going to steal this title from your organization, see if I can have it as a trending topic for VP of Action. I love it so much. Tell us about your path for action on your organization.
Yeah, I'd love to, and I'd love to go into a little bit of my history of how I got to AIA New York. It's actually not typical, I think. I'm an architect, a registered architect. I've been working for over 20 years, and really, I mean, it dawned on me early how male dominated and how white the profession was, to be honest. You know, it really did. It hit me and impact me, but it got worse and worse as I got further in my profession. I thought, you know, here I was, I graduated in a class that was half women. I assumed there would be half women kind of rising up the ranks along with me, right? And that was not happening at all. And as Greg mentioned, in those numbers are insane. And I wasn't even aware quite of how bad it was. But that 2% of Black architects has remained 2% for over 50 years, as Whitney Young can tell you. But what brought me back to AIA, because I had actually been a member, I scrambled through my career. I was like, I have to get registered. I have to check all these boxes. I have to get, you know, these kinds of jobs. And I got through all that. I was an AIA member. I tried to be active, but realized, you know what? I went to a conference and I was like, oh my God, no one would talk to me. There's no one who looked like me. Everyone, I literally felt like I was in a room full of I was just shunned. You know, I was like, okay, I guess I'm gonna go get my continuing ed credits and go home. It was very jarring, and it actually had an effect on me to the point where, at the point where I realized, like, this membership's not worth it to me. And I dropped out of AIA. And I tell that to everyone. I dropped out because I didn't feel like they were representing me and my interests. And, even though I'm ready to, talk to people who don't necessarily look or have the same background as me, they weren't willing, I thought, to reach out to me. So I was like, that's it. So fast forward many years, I kind of realized, if I want to see action happen, maybe I have to be part of it. And went back to AIA with an idea for equity at the firm level, just pushing for that. As Elsie said, you have to hold these organizations accountable, right? And what I saw was a lack of transparency, a lot of things that happened kind of behind the scenes and were understood, and promotion practices that weren't very, I'll go into that later, but all that brought me back to the AIA because it was the biggest organization of architects I could think of. I'm like, okay, I want to have an impact. Let me talk to these folks. I went to the New York chapter, kind of said my piece, and with some back and forth, I actually went on board and on staff because I was like, if I'm going to be a member of this organization, I want to feel like the organization offers me something. Somewhat to my surprise, I guess, there was years that I wasn't involved that I realized there are amazing people working in this organization. They have over, I think, 26, 27 committees that are focused on various issues that really go deep. And I was part of several programs that we started recently, including like the Civic Leadership Program and a community outreach and service, day of service, and also a high school program that we started a couple of years ago to connect with students who may not know about architecture. And there's a lot of misconceptions, I guess, about architecture out there, like what you need to know and how you need to be good at math. Thank God my guidance counselor told me that my mediocre math was okay. Like it was my design skill, my art, my interest, my passion that really got me through school and could get anyone through it. So all of those things said, I feel like, you said something about barriers to entry and how are we dealing with that? And rather than me fixating or focusing on like membership dues, what I want to see is value for your membership, because I feel like people are willing to join and be part of something or pay for something if they are getting something out of it. So my focus is really on pushing to have programs that appeal to more than just that, kind of very monolithic group of architects that it felt like it was serving for a long time. And I think nationally, there's a lot of things that they're doing to try to move the needle, whether it's with architects of color, whether it's with women architects, whether it's with, different communities they haven't reached out to before. I think there are things happening, but it is slow and it is a very complex, multifaceted. There has to be outreach on so many levels, and it has to be not just statements, it has to be long-term planning and action. It's not going to be an easy road, but it's definitely doable if we're all kind of in it together. So that's my spiel.
That's excellent. And, it really ties in also to a lot of conversation that we've been having in our organization a lot about allyship. And we're a women's focused organization, but we always talk about on a national level, we have a program called He for She's, for example, which sounds a little silly, but most of the chief procurement officers are men. And so we don't have buy-in or allyship from different communities, to your point, then how are we going to bring people in, and what does that look like, right? So, how do you change the general perception of the industry through your organization, right? So becoming more inclusive and bringing people in and going through the mentorship and having the conversations to say, here's something we know that you're good at, and here's another path to success, another profession that we'd like you to consider. But how are you, and anyone can jump in and answer this question, are there, general perceptions of your industry, and that, you understand that it could be very male or very white, but how do you have someone who is not a minority that can come in and say, well, I see value in this and important? Are you having those conversations and saying, we need your help as well?
Yes, we are having those conversations. For instance, Equity Council, there are 4 founding members, and one of us is white. And that's Erin Ruby, who's the current president of IIDA. And she's very much an ally, and she's very much, you know, this is also a passion of hers. Allies exist. They're all around. What I'm starting to find is that they don't always know how to reach out and be allies. And so part of IIDA's mission, not stated, but I think sort of in the back of all our minds, is how do we remain open to ideas from everyone, right? Even though Equity Council, for instance, is really focused on equity for Black designers, how do we remain open to ideas? How do we remain open to different facets, different perspectives on how to tackle this seemingly insurmountable problem of lack of representation in our industry? Because the perception is, and rightly so, that it is very white. It's interior design, so right now it's like 75%, 80% women, but it is, even from where I sit, 95% white. So, I mean, I don't know if that's true, but that's my perception. And so if that's my perception, and I've been in the business for 12 years or 13 years now, I can't imagine what a young person thinking about, you know, different or alternative careers, when they look at this, I can't imagine what they see. You know, it's just this blank white wall. And I honestly don't know how to fight that. I really don't know how to fight that. So allyship is key, because there may be somebody out there with an idea that says, well, okay, so maybe I'm part of this big white wall, but I can give you an idea of how to break through. Great, we'll listen to it. Let's see if it works. Let's try it out. Why not? You know, so there are so many different ways to partner with people. There are as many different ways to partner as there are people. Right. And so as long as we are open about our goals, as long as we are working toward those same goals, in my view, I'm not really sure it matters what you look like, although it would be nice to, I mean, I'm quite frankly quite proud of the fact that Equity Council is driven by 3 Black women. But in the end, it may not matter, right? Because it's that goal. It's that goal that we hope gets closer and closer and closer to us. And again, I'm speaking for me, for myself, but I would not be surprised if many individual members of IIDA New York didn't feel the same way.
I completely agree with Elise on virtually everything she said. But to add, you know, sometimes looking for allies isn't necessarily a successful thing. And because you're trying to feel them out and they're trying to feel you out and see whether or not if you two can relate and have that conversation. And
Agreed.
Sometimes the chemistry just simply isn't there.
Isn't there? No, that's true. And,
Right.
and not all allies work. I completely agree with you on that.
Right. So, you know, I think, you know, my approach has always been to get a finger or, you know, a portion of me inside that space. And because of that, I became incredibly active in a lot of professional related organizations. For example, I'm also on the board of directors for AIA New York. And a way for me to introduce, you know, this mindset to the table is to be in that room and listen to the conversations and then put a spin or twist to it to where it make people sit and say, oh, okay, I never thought of it that way. And just by making that quick adjustment or reminding other people that, yeah, that sounds great, but, you know, it might be even nicer if we did that, then, you know, it kind of starts that understanding and that level of comfort to where people can open up and talk with you about certain things. And I have to say that at least the AIA chapter of New York City has been extremely open with me, and I think in this whole process, which is great because, you know, Kavitha hit it. I mean, they're the largest, 94,000 members in the country, something like that. For a professional organization, that's pretty substantial. And they carry a lot of weight. And when you're able to get in and have these conversations and make little changes that make it easier for the next, you know, group coming through, then it's worth the charge, it's worth the effort, and it's worth all of the volunteer time that you put into these sort of things. So, and I'm sure Kavitha has a lot to say on that, again, because of her situation, which is quite unique and somewhat impressive. Knowing Kavitha and knowing, you know, the positive things that she's doing, you know, I just think that, you know, to seek allies is one thing, but to create them is another. And that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, Greg, thank you so much for that. It's been great to see I've been at AIA for just over 3 years, but just thinking back, just seeing the change in the representation on the board has been incredible, right? You know, and that's been a kind of an active effort on behalf of AIA and their kind of sister organization, the Center for Architecture, which we'll get into a little more, but Center for Architecture does their exhibitions and their education K through 12 program. But actively saying, you know what, if we don't have people in the room that can share their perspectives, we really can't just come up with a solution, you know, without talking to those folks and being really invested, you know? So I think that's been a challenge, but just AIA nationally, yeah, 95, I just looked it up again today, 95,000 members with 200 plus chapters all over the country and globally. But of those, 24% are female. Like what? You know, 24% are female. And of the 24% female, 62% of those women are white, 10% are Asian, 3% are Black, 7% Latino. So the numbers, everyone knows something's up with this, and without really taking an active approach to the issues, we can't move the needle. The needle hasn't moved with us just kind of sitting around waiting for it to. So it's definitely an ongoing effort.
So the next question on our list, you guys have started touching on it about the strategy that should be considered from members within your organization that can extend to their workplace. And, you know, how should it be driven? My spin on this would really be, is it a two-way street? Is it driven by your individual organizations to drive some sort of strategy within the workplace? And whose responsibility is it? Where is the ball going to start rolling?
Oh, can I jump in quick?
Absolutely. I was directed at you.
I can't wait on this one. I cannot wait. So that's how I started. I was like, you know what, you're AIA, you need to push these firms to be equitable. And they're like, no, we're a membership organization. We can't, you know, we're not policing our firms. We're not, you know, kind of like telling them how to run the firms. They run their firms, they're members. We provide, you know, professional development and design, you know, recognition, and continuing education, things like that. But we can't tell them how to run their firms. It's like, oh man, how are we going to do this, right? What's the incentive? What's the motivation? And what role does a professional organization? I kind of like grapple with this constantly because I think some of it has to come from different levels. Some of it is grassroots from people working at firms pushing. But again, you have to recognize the power structures in the firms, you know, and you have to also recognize that sometimes leadership doesn't know what's going on with the younger folks or the newer folks or the people who don't look like them in the firms. So that disconnect is really present. I think with AIA nationally, a few years ago, they put out the guides for equitable practice, which I think are a great resource. It's a 9-part kind of series where they did in-depth research and formed kind of ways for firms to start, for architecture firms or design firms to start talking about these issues. They apply pretty much to any professional organization or workplace though. So I think those are really helpful. And with AI New York, I know that we have a diversity and inclusion committee, which was pushing recently, especially after the murder of George Floyd and all the statements that came out, and the firms like all kind of expressing solidarity with the movement. They came out with, I think they called it the baseline 5. It was kind of a challenge for firms to take on these ways of increasing equity at their workplaces. So again, I think it's a little bit of back and forth, because I think the AIA may be looking for members to say, we want this, and then they can kind of respond to it. And firms are looking for like, well, we need guidance on this. Where are we getting it from? Shouldn't our professional organization provide it? So it's a little tricky. Yeah. And I'm sure others have more to say on that.
Yeah, I agree, Kavitha. It's when we started Equity Council, what we found when we started reaching out very selectively was that firms were waiting for guidance. They had no idea how to begin. And what we found is that we didn't even have a baseline. We had no idea, even in New York, how many designers of color we had. We had no idea how many Black designers there were. We didn't know how many were employed at the large and medium-sized firms. We had no idea. No one's keeping track of any of that. Interior Design Magazine doesn't ask that question, and that's the industry Bible, and they don't ask. They ask about billing and other things, but not about that. That's not their focus. And so that's where we started, and we saw it as a multi-pronged conversation, right? So we are going to provide that baseline. We're going to say, this is where we are now, and this is what we're working toward in the future, in the near term and in the long term. And this is what we need you to do. And we will work to, if not provide the tools, at least help you find those tools to reach those goals. So it's more than just providing a guideline. It's actually making sure that the various points are met, right? That the various goals are met. And we're starting with numbers, because again, that's the context that most people understand after 40 years of affirmative action, but we're moving beyond that, right? So it's not just we need 10% or 15% or this number or that number. It's, we really need to know that you are actually talking to your staffs about equity and about inclusion and about diversity and what that means and what that looks like and what you want it to look like, right? Because it could be that every firm has a different idea of diversity. But we, the Equity Council, are focusing on Black designers. And so those are the questions that we're going to ask. That's our base, right? And they can then take the tools that we provide and perhaps apply it to other ways that they want to diversify their staff. That's just fine. Our focus is on Black designers. And so yes, it is definitely a multi-pronged conversation. It can't just come from us. Especially with IIDA, we don't all work at design firms. I haven't worked at a design firm in 5 years. It's 4 years now. I'm on the client side. I'm still an interior designer. So then what does that conversation look like? So we have to take different approaches. And most designers, if they're working at medium or large size or large firm, are working for architecture firms. And so what does that look like? And how can we help navigate whatever that means for that firm and then for the individuals within that firm? So that's how we're approaching it.
All I can add is, we also are somewhat intrigued with the lack of data. So we can, find better ways to, project in the marketplace and bring attention to certain things in certain areas. But I know, that there are, a couple of grassroots groups of, loosely connected people within AIA and within NOMA that are really pushing now to our professional organizations to create a mandate to where perhaps continuing education is the way to go. And if that mandate is out there to where you have to take so many continuing education units per cycle in order to renew your license, in DEI or DIE related areas, then what you're doing is you're really forcing, again, that conversation, and or you're forcing people to sit and listen to, what some of these differences are, and and how minority professionals perceive the profession, which is slightly, I'm sure, different than the majority. So I would just keep an eye out on some of these initiatives that are out there, and there's some really bright people out there right now that are really working the back channels trying to make this happen. One happens to be the president-elect of our organization, and she's very active doing that with a whole bunch of her colleagues from AIA and sort. So I think things like that will kind of not just force the conversation because it's the flavor of the day, but it would institutionalize that conversation. It will force everyone to have that conversation at least, 1 hour or 2 hours a year in the context of the profession. So I think that little things like that could also help. And then, just we people of color, just make sure that when we show up, we show up. And and I always tell the folks that I work with and encourage and mentor, do whatever you can to be that expert in the room. So when someone says something, you understand it, you got it, you can move with it, and over a period of time, they'll look at you as that expert. And I think that that's very important, because there are a lot of people that have licenses that probably shouldn't have them. To be honest, you know what I'm saying? So this is a way just to make sure that people understand that we're also talented. We also have the ability to solve complex problems, and we're able to communicate, with the same language, and the same depth of knowledge as, the non-minority folks are that are the majority. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and I think we've hit on a lot of the education portion of it, the ally portion of it, the understanding from your point of view, and then taking the situations that you're in to try and make a change in that way. And now with the idea of perhaps continuing ed, making it a institutionalized or more corporate way of keeping this conversation alive, I think are all very positive things. There's absolutely nothing that was said today that I think would deter for that, but only encourage.
And we have a question in the chat that says, that I think is connected to our conversation right now, where it says, can you think of one thing attendees can do in their daily jobs in design that we can take away today to help further diversity? Anyone can take it. As I look at Kavitha.
Yeah, sure. Oh, I can't tell you're looking at me. See, that's what's so hard about this.
I know, because we're all like on
I know, I'm like, yeah, sure.
on our screen.
I think one thing I was thinking about, kind of like thinking about this event tonight and what we wanted to talk about, what people want to take away from it is ask, don't assume. Like this is something that I find a lot. It happens a lot in terms of, and I mean that in terms of, we make assumptions about a lot of things, or that the most powerful or the majority voice in the room is the default answer, right? So let's not make any assumptions, whether it's about like, oh, that person who just came back from maternity leave, I'm sure she doesn't want to have this complex design role anymore, to, right? I mean, you see this kind of happen all the time, and people think they're doing this person a favor, and you're really just like kind of sidelining their career. But I'm saying, as a designer, don't make any assumptions. And I know that's a hard thing to do, but if we're gonna, design is to me is a series of solving problems. We have to identify the problems, but we also have to identify, like, who are you serving at the end of the day, right? Is it just that one person who's speaking for the client, who's not necessarily the end user. Is this a space, is this a place that wants to be open for everybody and accessible for everybody in every way? I think you have to just kind of keep going and asking those questions to yourself, and always know that there's opportunity to learn. I think the whole, and that CEO thing, the continuing ed thing is amazing. I'm trying to be part of that conversation a lot. I love that idea and that push. But I think there's like a fear around talking about these issues, and a threat that's like someone's being called out as being biased or being whatever. And I think the first thing we have to do is just be open to talk and understand each other's perspectives. So as a designer, I think don't make any assumptions.
That's absolutely true. IIDA had an event late last year or earlier this year. I can't tell. Time means nothing in this pandemic. It really doesn't. We had a conversation, and it was a great turnout. We were talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice, and what that looked like, and how do we start. And I was speaking about not making assumptions. I was so pleasantly surprised at how many white participants are like, I want to have this conversation. I just don't know how to start it. And I don't want to start it and insult anyone in the room. And my response is, if you're expressing an interest in this, you're not going to be insulting anyone. Certainly not a Black person in the room, because our reaction will probably be, okay, well, let's hear what they have to say. And if you're coming from a good place, my reaction anyway is, oh my God, an ally? Yay! Like, somebody has to say something. Somebody has to start that conversation. And what we said earlier, what came up earlier, is that's not always going to come from leadership, right? And that's the other thing. If you're a designer just starting out, if you're 21, 22, 23, just coming out of design school, and you have your first little job, and whether you're an intern or design assistant or a librarian or a junior architect or whatever it is, you're like, well, I'm just going to stay in this little corner and just listen and learn. Well, you can't. Learning isn't just listening, right? You have to want to take some chances. You have to be open to making mistakes and being corrected or guided so that you can learn, but also you're learning how to communicate. And so the more you do that, the more you practice, the better you will be at finding that opportunity to bring in your perspective, whether it's as a designer or as a project manager or as whatever your role is. And that's what's exciting. As you grow, as you figure out how you can contribute to your firm or to your team, is how you're going to then find out how you can bring up these topics. And sometimes it's not even a matter of bringing up the topic. I mean, if you're, not too long ago, we had a conversation at work about why there was reluctance among certain populations to get medical care. And I was the only Black person at the table. And I was like, really? Do I really still have to have this conversation? But it was obvious that I had to. And I was like, I may have an answer for you. And I spilled. And they're like, oh, we never think about that. It's not like we didn't know. We just never think about it. Well, think about it, right? And again, my perspective was as a Black woman, but if you're an immigrant to this country, what's your cultural experience from that other country? Bring that in. It's valid, because people may not know, or they may not think, oh, actually, this is something that needs to be brought into the design conversation, because everything goes into design. It's not just lines, it's not just volume and light and voids. It's not just color. It's not just, adjacencies. It's really about an expression of culture. And what does that look like? And so every voice is valid. And so it's just being willing to take that chance, and then in taking those chances, finding where you can insert your voice and bring in your perspective and your culture and your own ideas.
Greg?
Well, again, there's not really much one can add to that. I mean, because that's really what it's all about, right? If you're in a situation to where there's no need for that kind of conversation, then we're in a different space.
Right.
And just, understanding your differences and helping other people to understand them, be it culturally or not, it's very important. And you have to be willing to talk about it and share. And more importantly, just, don't just talk, listen. Hear what others are saying, see what others are doing, and acknowledge, everyone that you're working with in that environment. It would be a perfect world if, race and it was blind, and, and the notion of color and, cultural differences and everything was just so neutral. I think that's one of the things that actually makes the profession quite interesting, actually, is because I'm constantly learning from the people that I employ. I mean, and some people are very conscious and aware of their cultural norms, and which are somewhat different for, the others that are in the office, be it dialect or language. And because of that, they're afraid to share or speak, but encourage them to. You'd be surprised on how much, they could share that could really, enlighten you in your journey as a professional. So that's about all I can add to that. I mean, this is a beautiful conversation. And I really wish that, there was a way to where we can encourage all of our peers to sit down with, 5 or 6 people, and, a cup of coffee or tea or whatever, and just like let your hair down and talk. I mean, and freely, so you can get a true understanding, about, where we are, so.
And ask the dumb questions.
Ask the absolutely
Ask
yes.
the dumb questions.
Yes.
Also, I want to add to, there is no such thing as being colorblind in America. So stop saying you don't see color. That's one bit of advice. Don't say that, because in this country, everybody sees color. So just admit it and then move forward, right? Everybody sees, if you're, and makes assumptions. So you have to admit that. There's no such thing as colorblind. So knowing that and being comfortable with that also will free you, right? Because you're not going to go in and say something that people don't know. If I go in and say, I'm a Black woman in design, how is this news? I'm a Black woman, I am an interior designer. This is not news. But some people won't say that.
Right.
So say it. I'm a Black woman in interior design. Oh, okay, well, if you can say it, I can say it. Yes, you can, because it's that obvious. But sometimes it's the obvious that people won't say that stops the conversation cold. So first assumption out of the way, no such thing as colorblindness, just say it. And if you're coming from a good place, again, speaking for me, that shows. That shows. Okay. That's my 2 cents.
We have a couple questions that I think would be important to address, more along the lines of bringing your true self, your whole self to the workplace, where I'm gonna combine a couple questions that we have. One of the questions, how can designers create more inclusive products and spaces? And kind of ties into, how does a person's culture affect their approach as a creative thinker? I think I'd like both questions to be answered, but I'm going to have it as a choice for anyone to answer, any of the panelists.
I'll start because I'm probably the most dry and boring of the group.
No, not true. Stop.
No.
But, you know, it's being who and what I am in this country and going through the education process in this country. You're taught to think and see and process information a certain way. And, you know, I don't have an outside cultural influence per se, other than being Black American and grew up on the street. And, you know, it's a very different thing. When you're taught, you know, day one, architecture history 101, and you're talking about, you know, early Greek and Roman architecture, or early Christian architecture, and that's when your eyes start to open and say, oh, okay, I was unaware of that, and you start to absorb that kind of thing. And you know, for me, culturally, I think the influence that I get would be through the associations that I have in people, and the love and passion I have for traveling, and the way that I do it is by, you know, if I go to a place, I try and stay with locals. I don't stay in hotels. I eat what they eat. I walk with them where they go, and I try and be a part of that culture. And through that process, walking through the streets and, you know, taking in all of these beautiful, you know, delights, and walking, you know, you just somehow record some of this and you recall it when you need it, you know, during that design process. And for me, that's how I'm able to, you know, include, you know, cultural, you know, influences into anything that I do. But I wasn't born in, you know, in the Caribbean, or, you know, in Africa or in Europe. So I don't have those things to draw upon. So I rely heavily on the people that I surround myself by. And that's how I get my, for lack of a better, adobo in my everything that I do.
Okay.
Not your adobo.
Adobo, I'm glad you
learned so
actually.
much from this panel. I'm taking notes.
So Gregory, like, I don't know, growing up in this country as an immigrant, you know, I was born in India. I came over as a baby, basically. So I grew up here, but I wish there were courses on the things that I see now, like intercultural competence, you know? What does that mean? It means just, it doesn't mean like not seeing, as Elsie said, it's not about not seeing difference. It's about seeing it and respecting it. And, you know, really, you know, being willing to listen and take things from a different perspective. But I did grow up in a, and still, I think, move around in a world where assimilation is key, right? It's like the things about me that are different, I have to tamp down because I don't want to scare anybody. You know, I don't want to talk about anything that's going to make anyone uncomfortable or anything else. And when I see things that are happening now with like the violence against Asian Americans, or violence against Black Americans, I just can't, I don't know how these things happen where, you know, entire groups are targeted for just being who they are, or for just being different. You know, this is the stuff I can't quite come to terms with. I think all of us are feeling that way. But I want to talk about bias, because I think there's a little bit of bias against bias. And we all have bias, and that's like the starting place for maybe that acceptance of saying bias is just a way we see the world, right? All of us see the world through our experiences, how we grew up, what our family thinks, what we heard around the dinner table, what we saw on TV. Everything else kind of bakes us into this person we are. And I think of bias as this like shortcut our brain uses to make a judgment call. And often it's a bad judgment call. Sometimes it's just a judgment call. It's just something that's like, okay, this person is this way because that's what I've heard about this group of people, right? When you stop and recognize that you're making that judgment based on this bias of something you've heard way back when, or you've got embedded in yourself, I think that's the step where things can start changing, right? And it's kind of what Elsie said, it's the have those conversations, because I'd rather somebody ask me some question if they don't know something about my background or my culture or whatever else, than just made assumptions about it and jump to conclusions about it. I think that's where we start the conversations. I can't even remember your question, Keisha.
No,
the two parts that, but I do feel I do feel like that's what kind of I wanted to jump in there and just say that I think the hardest thing about dealing with these things is actually recognizing that we're all coming from some level of a place of some bias, right? And it doesn't mean you're a horrible person or you're evil. It's just recognizing it in yourself and where it comes from, and is it valid or is it something you need to kind of stop in your tracks and be like, wait a minute.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, Kavita. I think everyone is biased, right? We all live in our vessels. I can't jump from my vessel to Kavita's or to Greg's or to Keisha's, right? This is the only vessel I have. This is the only eyes that I can see through. So that's already the bias. I can't see it through someone else's eye. I can't see the world through someone else's eyes. The trick is to open your mind to other people's experiences and accept them as valid. In terms of bringing your own cultural richness to what you do, I think also keep in mind that design is more than just being an interior designer or an architect, right? There's product and industrial design. There's so many different ways that you could express yourself. And if you're express yourself and also contribute to the world. And so if you're thinking about making products or designing in a way that is more inclusive and that is more accessible, maybe that's not interior design for you. Maybe it's furniture design. Maybe it's designing, please, an attractive hip chair, for instance. Like, there are a lot of hip chairs out there, but boy, are a lot of them ugly. And I'm not gonna name anybody. I'm just saying, that would be nice. Can someone come up with a really beautiful, weight-bearing hip chair? That is, it's inclusive. Yeah, it brings in your design sensibilities. It also brings in your own cultural and world experiences, because you may know someone who has orthopedic and bone issues, right? So that's one thing. Design carpeting or design hard surface flooring that aids with designs in color, but that aids those with neurological disorders like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or dementia. That was something that my eyes were open to, because my father suffered from dementia, and any little change he would freak out, and I'd be like, Dad, it's just the floor. But he's perceiving it in such a different way. It's a change, and he couldn't process it. And so, hey, bring on your creativity. Like, I don't happen to be a product designer, but that certainly is something that I keep back of mind when I'm looking at spaces. And when I'm in a meeting and we're talking about flooring and we're talking about changing from one type to the other, that's something I always bring up. Like, guys, there's a huge difference between the corridor and the exam room. Like, can we talk about this? And we talk about it. And I don't have to say, well, my father had dementia. No, you just bring it up. Like, this is what I see. And it's maybe something that no one else sees at the table. But you've brought in your ideas, and there's that little spark of something, right? That will bring in your perspective and your experience into what you're doing. Yeah, I think I answered the question.
You did. And then it kind of triggered something for me as well, because I was participating on another panel last week about allyship and having a conversation about diversity. And it was really interesting because one of the participants said, I came to this conversation thinking that diversity was only about race. And it never crossed my mind that I had to bring this up. So your comment about hip chair and the diversity in the use of all this, I think it's important for me to say that diversity doesn't only have to do with race, ethnicity. It goes with gender. There are people who are LGBTQIA. That's a different community. That's a diverse community. There are veterans. There are women. There are people with disabilities. There's a huge life outside of your workplace and your actual profession. But here are other elements of diversity. And I think we tend to be so pigeonholed just to think about it. Oh, when we say you're bringing your culture to work, it means, Keisha, I know you're from Jamaica, so you're gonna bring that to the workplace. No, there's some other things I can bring as well.
I think I find that really amusing where people are like, well, if you're talking about diversity, you're talking about race. And it's like, well, I come in as I walk in as a Black woman. What are the assumptions you make about me? Well, I'm going to break some assumptions for you.
Right.
I speak or am familiar with 4 languages. Did you know that? Would you have assumed that if I didn't say it? No. I grew up speaking French. I learned English when I was 4 or 5. My parents are Haitian immigrants. And I speak the way I do because my parents insisted, you're going to be in this house and speak English, which we'd really rather you not do, then you're going to speak it properly.
Right.
And there are no slang words in this. If I don't know what it means, you're not going to say it. Okay. Okay, fine. Right. So, that's my experience. So that already, breaks that all open. I remember having a conversation with somebody I worked with, and we were at some outing. We were going target shooting. And I said, and I'm a liberal. I'm just saying right now, I'm a registered Democrat. I'm more, not liberal, but more progressive. So, the stereotype there is we hate guns, we hate all whatever. And I was like, well, when I was in the rifle club in junior high, and my colleague was like, what? Yeah, when I was in the rifle club in junior high. And she was like, wait, that doesn't compute. Well, you take the time to compute that. And I'm going to talk about the target practice that we took in middle school. There are so many prejudices that people bring to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not your job to break them and to be like, I'm going to be, the myth buster.
Right.
But when there's a chance to break that myth, man, take it.
Absolutely.
Take it. You would be surprised at how that opens up the world, not just for yourself, because then you get to talk about your experience, but for other people to ask you questions and to bring them in. It's so important. And that's design too. It's bringing all of that in, right? Gregory mentioned adobo. If we're going to talk in cooking terms, if you're going to be, you want to bring in the spices and the different sauces, and are we going to saute or fry or bake, or there are so many different approaches to design.
Flavor. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, what?
Flavors.
Yes, so many, and they come from everywhere. And if all you know is hot dogs and hamburgers, bring it on. It's okay. It's all right.
So we're coming up on time. We're at 7:15 by my time, and I've been enjoying this conversation just so much. I had a conversation earlier with my parents, and I'm also an immigrant, moved here when I was 12, 13 from Jamaica. And I came to the table with a lot of biases as well, because I never thought about the fact that, my my pediatrician was Black, or that the family lawyer was white Jamaican. I never thought about the fact that the people on Air Jamaica at the time, that the flight attendants and the pilots were Black, or all the Black architects or professionals or business owners around me. And I was never surprised by that. Of course, my parents decided to move to Connecticut, but you know, and so my friends that were from all over the place, you know, my friends here, I remember when they came to Jamaica with me, they were like, oh my God, there is a Black pilot. And oh my God, you know, the Black professionals and the people that I grew up with and I was exposed to, it never crossed my mind that it was an issue that, you know, my best friend, whose name was also Keisha, but her name was Keisha Chin, and her mother was, you know, her father was Chinese and her mother was Indian. I never thought that was weird. It was just, I mean, it's an island, so people are from all over the place. But, you know, I came to the table with a lot of biases. I never thought that color or gender or any of these things are going to be a barrier to whatever profession I chose, right? But that's something that, you know, once I went through the education system here and I saw all the different obstacles that popped up. There's a question in the Q&A that I think here it is. He says, as a minority not of color, I've primarily seen talent being the driving factor of one's success. While I have historically been in the visual merchandising sector, which has always been, quote, an open and accepting of all cultures and backgrounds, the question is, can you elaborate where the obstacles are, understanding talent is the primary driver? So I have to say that, you know, coming from a country that was, you know, that's what was instilled in my head. It was more, oh, well, you can be successful if talent, education, exposure. It's a very classist, you know, based country, you know, but that was always a driver. But growing up here, going through the educational system, I know I'm in, you know, I grew up in a very privileged situation here in Connecticut, but to me, the obstacles were so multifaceted, right? So I'm going to ask anyone on the panel to address that question about the idea of the talent being the driving force and the obstacles there, because I think it's an important question to answer.
Yeah, I unfortunately, I think talent is rarely the deciding factor. Rarely. This is my second career. I was in magazine publishing. I was a writer and editor for 20 years before coming to design. And I can tell you, even there, talent was not the driving factor. It was who you knew and what you did and who you did it with. And you can take that any way you want, because it's probably all those things.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I had to go there. And I don't think it's quite so mercenary in design. Thank God. It's much nicer people. And it's a completely different mindset. But I still find that talent is rarely the driving factor. It still is who you know. Mm-hmm. That's why it's so important to speak up when you can, right? And to get out, and if you can, join a professional organization, because that's the best way to meet other people, get involved. And if you're not comfortable networking, then joining a professional organization is actually easier than trying to go it alone and network on your own, right? Because you kind of have a built-in community if you're getting involved, because you'll be working with other volunteers. And so you already know that you're with like-minded people. And that certainly helped me. I am terrible at networking. And so that's what brought me to IIDA 14 years ago now. Because I was like, I suck at networking. I can't go in and go, hi, my name is Elsie St. Ledger, and I'm new to interior design, and I'm fabulous Yeah, I can't do that. There are people that can do that. I'm not one of those people. And so joining a professional organization certainly helps with that. And that mitigates for the reality that talent is not the driving force.
I also wonder how you define talent, and that's kind of key, because it's, when I spent many years working at architecture firms, a few different firms, and assumed talent meant one thing, or the value of a professional meant one thing, and I would see the side of that person in the office, right, who was really hardworking, conscientious, did great drawings, blah blah blah. But I didn't necessarily see all those people going into a client meeting and presenting the ideas and doing the other side. And then I went over to the client side. I worked on the client side for a while. Mm. And my old, people from my former firm were suddenly working for me, working for our client. And I saw them come to the table and I was like, okay, I have a completely different perspective on people. Right. Not necessarily good or bad, but oh, that person that I didn't really get their value before, I see that they're amazing at running a meeting. They're amazing at speaking to the clients in a way they can understand this stuff. What is talent? What are we talking about? And you may, if you're somebody who's working their way up the ladder, fairly easily, you can assume it's based on your talent, but think broadly about the people who aren't getting up there. There's probably just as much talent on those lower rungs, clamoring to get up, that aren't making it because of things like what Elsie said, or other factors that are in the way. I think talent is, I've found that things that are kind of vague, like talent, are really bad ways to define somebody's success, and it's better to kind of spell it out a little more clearly.
I think, in my slice of the pie, we always have this conversation about, it's business owners. So we say, people like to do business with people they know, like, and trust. And if you're not an extrovert, and if you don't go in the room and have someone to make that introduction, you might be successful if you're okay, but people like you, right? So you can have that conversation. That could be, to your point, the person who makes the connection, is successful, makes the client feel comfortable, and that's who they want to connect with.
Therein lies the genesis of the statement I made earlier about being the expert in the room. Right. Mm-hmm. That's really what it's all about, because I could tell you that, I literally left a job because I was told that that the meeting already had a Black person going to the meeting, and it was not a good image to bring to. And that just ignited a super hot fire, in my gut, and really changed the trajectory of everything that I did from that point onward. So, the key is really just, and I considered myself as being somewhat intelligent and somewhat responsible and somewhat creative. Is that what you call talent? Again, it's in the eye of the beholder, the person that's actually passing that judgment or giving you that status as being talented or not. So I completely understand what Kavitha mentioned, and I too challenge the use of the term talent in that context. I just think that there's always going to be obstacles, and it's really about how you navigate through to get to where you want to be. So.
And herein lies the value of all these professional organizations, and trying to find your niche, and trying to figure out how you navigate this. For all of our organizations, it's a way of building community, and trying to find that path in, because not everyone is going to have, even if you have this fantastic resume, you still need a way to be present in the room. And how do you even get there? Right? Okay, we have 6 more minutes left. If there's anyone that has any questions for us, please drop it in the chat or raise your hand, or all these wonderful Zoom functions. We'd love to hear back from you. And if anyone else has some last minute comments.
I would like to just make a plug for our organization and ask that for anyone that's interested in learning more about NOMA, to just look us up on the internet at nycoba.org. That's nycoba.org. And it gives you a pretty good idea of who we are, starting out with our mission to our programming and events, and similar type webinars and conversations are happening on our end as well. And would love to have anyone come and join. All are welcome.
So I will take this opportunity as well to plug IIDA, specifically IIDA New York. New York City is the hub, but we are, like I said, a statewide organization. So if you are anywhere near the 4 other city centers, Rochester, Buffalo, Albany, or Syracuse, please consider joining the organization. We are always in search of talented, ambitious, creative people to join our organization. And again, the more voices, the better. And it's iidany.org, and you can find out all about us. And yeah, please join. I really do think that one way to diversify our professions is to join these professional organizations, because what do they say? The squeaky wheel gets the oil.
That's it.
You know, if you've got the backing of an organization while you're making those squeaks, you know, it's more power to you, right? And it's more eyes and ears for the message.
Wonderful.
And I'll just say, yeah.
In the chat, go for it.
Well, I'm just going to say, this Zoom world we're in now actually makes everything a little more accessible in a way. So all of those committees that we have at AI New York, they have committee meetings, you know, every month. And I think if you don't have to be a member to come and see what people are talking about and feel it out. And as Elsie said, and Gregory said, you have to be in the room, right? So I didn't even know that before, that you could just come to these meetings and pop in and see what's going on and feel it out and say like, oh, you know what? I just found like my people, like the people I want to be talking to, the topics I want to be talking about, and then maybe joining and membership comes down the road, but please come be part of the conversation. We've got a lot going on and a lot of other events and activities as well. But thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this panel. It was really nice to meet everyone.
Absolutely. This is wonderful.
New vocabulary. I'm happy with this.
Adobo? Was it adobo?
Word of the night. Actually, flavor of the night.
Flavor of the night. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you so much, guys. I'm going to ask Andrew to come in, and I can't wait for us to have a part 2.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, thank you all. I wish, you know, we were all in the same room together. I just can imagine us, you know, having dinner and drinks together, and, you know, continuing this conversation for many, many hours. It was honest, it was frank. You know, I hope it was confrontational as well, but, you know, we were able to really have great discussion, and I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us and sharing with us your stories, your perspectives, and also to the audience for joining us to, you know, kind of delve into this with us to tackle diversity further within, you know, our industry and our organizations and our professions. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.